A melancholy Wednesday here for Beyond the Cage, as it has been reported by TMZ Sports that UFC fighter Josh Semen has passed away at the age of 28 due to drug overdose complications after being in a coma for several days. If you have not been following this story, Josh Semen was supposed to be fighting here pretty soon. Just a few days ago, he was found unresponsive. This would have been last week in an apartment in South Florida with his roommate Troy Kirkenberg, who was pronounced dead at the scene. He had spent the last several days in a coma, and according to one of his castmates there in the Ultimate Fighter and current Bellator fighter, Gilbert Jamal Smith, that Josh Semen is now dead. There are rumblings that heroin played a role, but Josh Semen's mother came out and said doctors found no traces of that drug in his system, and there were also no signs of foul play. Again, Josh Semen was 28. I'm sure more of this will come out as of time of recording. This report by TMZ Sports is only about an hour old. So, as of right now, according to TMZ, Josh Semen has passed away. So, rest in peace, Josh Semen, and hopefully this story we can find more about in the coming days and weeks that this will play out. So, till now, that's all I can report on. I'm just reporting what has been said by TMZ. So, without any further ado, let's move on to some more pleasant things here on Beyond the Cage. Let's start with UFC Fight Night Portland, which was last weekend on Fox Sports 1. 4 fights were shown on the main card. Before we get to that, a couple of notable shoutouts on the undercard, as Curtis Blades was able to pick up his first UFC victory, second round knockout, netting him a Performance of the Night bonus as he defeated Cody East. Also, Nate Marquardt had an absolute fantastic knockout of the Barn Cat, Tamden McRory, in the second round, earning him a Performance of the Night bonus as well. Also, Andre Fili picked up a victory over Hakron Diaz in the featherweight division, so that was a pretty big one there as well. Another Performance of the Night bonus went to Henrique da Silva as he defeated Joachim Christensen via armbar submission in the second round. That was in the light heavyweight division. The first fight of the main card on Fox Sports 1 was in the flyweight division, as our good friend of the show, Louis Smolka, took on newcomer Brandon Moreno. If Brandon Moreno sounds familiar or looks familiar to you, of course he was and was being featured on this season of the Ultimate Fighter Season 24. He was ranked the 16 seed fighter doing seeds 1 through 16. The winner of the tournament then goes on to face Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson for a shot at the UFC Flyweight Championship. Moreno was a champion out of an organization in Arizona, had trained some time with one of the coaches in Henry Cejudo. I believe had a record of 11-3 coming into this fight. Obviously was taking it on about less than 2 weeks' notice. And obviously, even though he put up a valiant effort, if anyone saw his first fight there against the number 1 seed, who is the reigning, or I guess former reigning RFA flyweight champion, he put up a heck of a scrap. So just knowing that, you knew this kid was going to be tough, and he wasn't going to make it easy on Lewis. However, I don't think too many people expected this, as Moreno was able to submit Smolka in the first round via guillotine choke, netting him a Performance of the Night bonus. And I believe Moreno had an early takedown, and Smolka was able to get out of that position, was trying to land a takedown of his own, kind of put his head up a little too much than maybe he should have, kind of in the armpit, torso area. Moreno felt that or saw that, started the choke, and it was tight enough after dropping down to guard. Smolka couldn't last anymore and had a tap at 223, and really just a little small error there by Lewis that Moreno was able to capitalize on. And sure, he may have not won the Ultimate Fighter, he may not won a fight on that season, but he just beat the number 9 ranked guy in the world, so on short notice. So this kid definitely has potential, and I think that's what a lot of people were saying. Like, yeah, he's the 16 seed, but this kid has a lot of potential, and if he can harness that and it goes into the right direction, he could be something. And this is obviously a step in the right direction for Moreno and for Lewis. still got to hold your head up high. You're still one of the better fighters in the division. You know, it wasn't something that you did majorly wrong. Obviously, the change in opponent doesn't help, but he has expressed interest to be right back in there. I still think a fight with Sergio Pettis, even with this loss, is still very intriguing, and I think he'll be right back on the winning track within his next fight. UFC newcomer, and also this was a little bit of a short notice, Zach Otto. I was definitely pronouncing his name wrong. Didn't know the W didn't add anything to it. Anyway, Zach Otto took on Josh Berkman, and as they were saying, Berkman was actually preparing for a fight at 155 against Bobby Green. Otto comes in on short notice, so they just move it up to 170. But you could tell that there was a difference in weight class. Otto looked huge compared to Josh Berkman. And Berkman, I don't know if it was because he was kind of starting a weight cut once again at 155, even though he got to abandon that a few weeks before. It just didn't seem like that same killer instinct I remember seeing Josh Berkman, not only in just his previous fights in his return to the UFC, but even going back to World Series of Fighting in his first run in the UFC. Just, he wasn't pulling the trigger enough for me and throwing a lot of kicks. Yeah, they were effective, but Otto was the one throwing the powerful strikes with the hands and ended up outstriking Berkman 80-50. Berkman did land one takedown, however, that was all the way in the third round, which may have gave Berkman that round, but even then I thought he had dropped the first two and needed a finish. And it just never felt like there was a sense of urgency. And for Otto, going against a solid veteran like this, on short notice, I thought he performed admirably. I think the only thing I could maybe give a slight criticism to is I would have liked to seen him pick up the output a little more, because I felt like there were a couple times he rocked him with some shots, could have maybe tried a couple blitz and flurries to throw off Berkman, who was not countering all that effectively and who really wasn't checking the leg kicks very well either. So I thought he could have capitalized and maybe put on a little more pressure, but that's maybe nitpicking because he did get the victory, and man, he definitely, and already I believe booked his next fight, so he's not satisfied with resting on his laurels here. He's getting right back in there, and I'm trying to see if they have it scheduled. All right, they're not showing it on Fight Metric who his next fight will be against, but I know he has already booked it. So for Berkman, I would think he would get cut. I don't know if they're going to give him a concession considering this was a short notice fight and he had to move back up to his old weight class of 170 instead of 155. I'm not sure, but now I believe he's like 1-6 with a no contest since returning to the UFC. I'm going to double check that. Yeah, he returned to the UFC back in January of 2015. That officially went down as a no contest in his fight against Hector Lombard. He now has only won one fight in his last 6 bouts. That came in February of this year against KJ Nunes. Overall, he stands now 1-4 with a no contest since returning to the UFC. I don't know if that's really grounds for sticking around. Sure, he had an awesome fight of the night performance, knockout loss, mind you, loss against Patrick Cote. But other than that, he hasn't been really that exciting. So I'm not sure what the UFC does with him. Maybe they give him one more just because, again, he was trying to fight at a lower weight class. But even then, I'm not sure there's much left in the tank for Josh Berkman, who now at 36 years old may also want to start thinking about calling it a career too. Not just necessarily UFC giving him the boot. The next fight of the evening was in the lightweight division as Will Brooks, former Bellator champion, he took on Alex Oliveira. Oliveira missed weight pretty bad in this fight. He ended up missing weight by about 6 pounds. Of course, he has fought a couple of bouts at 170 for the UFC, his most notably being the main event against the real cowboy. He's the Brazilian cowboy, Donald Cerrone, back in February. But he tried to get back to 155. It didn't work out. I have a feeling that he probably won't try to make 155 pounds again. Will Brooks still took the fight. Of course, he gets that extra 20% pay from Oliveira getting punished, and you could just tell the size difference was something of a factor, maybe more of a factor than people thought, maybe more of a factor than even I thought, because Will Brooks is such a grinder, and while not a big guy physically, in terms of size, he's very stocky, he's very compact, and he is muscular. It's just that Alex Oliveira is just ridiculously tall. You know, he's more spread out, he's lanky. He has a very imposing frame, especially when trying to make it down to 155, standing at 5'11", where I believe Phil Brooks is just 5. He's listed at 5'10", but the size, that can't be right. Oliveira looks a lot bigger than 5'11". I'm like 5'10" myself, and Oliveira looks way bigger than me. Anyways, Will Brooks, I thought his grinding style might be able to catch Oliveira, a guy who had to cut weight, missed. His conditioning may be an issue, but that overall size and length Will Brooks had a hard time dealing with, especially in the first round. There was a lot of clinch battling. Alex Oliveira was landing a lot of knees on the inside. Will Brooks did officially land 2 takedowns, but I felt in that first round really didn't do much until towards the end of the round. He had a close submission attempt there, and Oliveira, I think, was some of those knees either bruised or cracked or dislocated one of the ribs of Will Brooks, and it was really affecting him. In round 2, both of them were able to land 2 takedowns, but Oliveira once again was more on the offensive, outstriking Brooks 24-26. And again, I think Oliveira probably took that round as well. Pretty close. I think Brooks had an early takedown, had Oliveira's back at one point, but was never super close to sinking in that rear naked choke. And then in the third round, you could just see that Brooks was just grimacing every time he had to move or twist his body. And to me, the beginning and end was Brooks going for kind of a back hip toss throw where he really had to twist his body, and you could see him just not have the energy or strength to do so with that rib, and kind of halfway through, his body kind of gave out on him, and that's when Oliveira, to me, really took advantage, and you just saw Brooks grimacing from that point on, and he hung tough, but he got in a position where his ribs hurting. You got this big dude on top of you who didn't look like he was slowing down, just kept on raining down the punches there, and towards the end, in the third round, at 3:30, Herb Dean had to come in and stop this one. And after the fight, Daniel Cormier was doing the color commentary and was not very happy with Alex Oliveira, the way he conducted himself as a UFC fighter, and kind of taunted Brooks a little bit. He did something with his hand towards his mouth, and then he gave him a D-Generation X from Pro Wrestling crotch chop, which, sure, maybe not the classiest thing to do, but if you know that it's from like pro wrestling, I didn't mind that as much. Brooks obviously took offense. He just got right up and kind of ran over, and there was a little bit of a scuffle. Was it the greatest way to celebrate? Probably not, but obviously there was a lot of heat towards these two gentlemen. A lot of people are questioning whether Will Brooks should have took the fight or not. Will Brooks is a guy who's an ultra competitor, and the way he wins a lot of his fights is from breaking people down, and that's a really different mindset, I think, than going in there and trying to knock someone out. And I think for Will Brooks, he just saw it as a challenge, and this guy likes a challenge. So for Will Brooks, I don't think there was ever a question that he wasn't going to take this fight, regardless of what weight Oliveira showed up at. I just think that's the type of guy he is, and he saw it as a challenge. If I can beat this guy who missed weight and dominate him, that does well for me as a fighter, because it shows that I can beat 170 guys too. Bring them on, I can beat them. I'm one of the best in the world. And I think that's what Will Brooks was trying to prove. However, at the same token, because Oliveira did miss weight, is a bigger guy, a loss, sure, does hurt some momentum. He hasn't lost in quite a few years, since to Saeed Awad, knocking him out in 30 seconds. It doesn't look as bad because everyone knows Oliveira missed weight and really is a 170 fighter, or should be a 170 fighter. So, in terms of the title picture, yeah, it halts Brooks a little bit, but the title picture is pretty jammed up right now. So I think Will Brooks still gets a pretty big-time fight, again, once his ribs heal. And I guess maybe that's the only consequence of the thing is getting hurt. But you have a chance to get hurt in any fight, whether it's by damage from your opponent, like the knees from Oliveira, or it's just something that went wrong when your body was twisting or moving. So that's always a danger when you step into this cage to take on somebody else. So I don't think Will Brooks regrets the decision. Obviously, he does get a little bump in pay. Do that. I'm sure once his ribs heal up, he'll be right back in there. So for Oliveira, good win, but stay at 170. I think that's your future. It's just you're still a young guy. You're only a year older than me, so you're only 28 years old. You've had a pretty successful run so far in the UFC. I mean, you're 6-2. You lost your debut in what was a close, entertaining fight there against Gilbert Burns, and then of course, you lost the fight to Donald Cerrone. Again, no shame in that. But you've had some incredible knockouts, like your Peter Hallman knockout there back in November of last year. You have a nice win over James Mutasri. Now you have the win over Will Brooks. You've submitted KJ Noon. So, you got some wins. You're 15-3 in your career. Got a lot of potential, and I think even at 170, I think you would be a force to be reckoned with. So, stay there. And for Will Brooks, obviously, once you take on guys your own size, it might help you a bit, but this was definitely a learning experience for Will Brooks. I mean, this is a guy that's, average to, you could maybe make a case below average UFC 155er, and he beat you. So, you got to look at changing strategies in one time and obviously healing up, and, everything's a learning experience. It's been several years since Will Brooks lost, so maybe he'll go on another run, not losing another 4 years. Main event of the evening was in the bantamweight division as two former flyweight contenders met in the main event as John Lineker took on John Dodson. And boy, this was an incredible fight. You did hear some boos ring out from the crowd during this matchup. I'm not really sure why. I understood that Dodson was doing, I'm not going to really call it running because he wasn't directly running away, but he was doing a lot of moving around, and for the most part it worked. As of the 323 thrown strikes by John Lineker, only 94 landed. So obviously what he was doing was working, because Lineker was throwing a lot and missing a lot. Dodson did have a slight edge in landed strikes, so 101 to 191 was a lot more accurate. However, he did get shut down on all 6 takedown attempts he tried in this fight, most notably in round number 4, where he was stuffed 3 times by Lineker. And I think that had to be a big boost for the Brazilian's confidence, knowing that Dodson may try to take this thing to the ground, stuffed him every time. First round, I definitely would have scored it for Dodson. I think that head kick and kind of late flurry there gave him the round. He landed the more significant strikes. Fight metric stats kind of back up my thoughts there. 15-9 in terms of landed strikes there for Dodson. Round 2 and 3, very even. You look at the numbers, 16-15 landed strikes in favor of Lineker, and then both landed exactly 15 strikes in round number 3. However, I thought the more significant strikes were coming from the way of Lineker, who, was definitely missing a lot. As the stats prove, he missed a lot of combinations in this fight. However, the couple times he was able to chase down and kind of a scramble and get Dodson not moving for a second, he was landing some heavy bombs, and I would have gave Lineker round 2 and 3. And round 4, while still throwing a lot of output, you could tell was not coming quite as fast as it had been in the previous 3 rounds, that being round 4 and 5. And Dodson was starting to move well. Did get caught a couple times. I think in round 5 was, to me, the first round I really saw Dodson not moving at that same pace. He wasn't avoiding the shots quite like he was in round 4. However, his hand speed was still there, and with Lineker slowing down a little bit, I thought he was really landing some nice shots, especially with that left hand. He landed that head kick a few more times, and he actually outstruck Lineker in that 5th round, 34-27. I would have gave Dodson the final 2 rounds and I would have gave him the victory 48-47. To me, that closest round in this fight was probably round 1, and depending on how you scored round 1 is probably who you had winning the fight. When it came down, all 3 judges scored it 48-47. However, 2 were in favor of the Brazilian John Lineker to get this victory. The currently ranked number 3 fighter beat the number 10 fighter at the time. And the only, I guess, shame for Lineker was the fact that he missed weight. Doesn't appear as though he's going to get cut, which I think if he would have lost, the UFC would have seriously considered. But he gets the win, and in the process, I think puts himself one away from a title shot just because of the weight. If he didn't miss weight, I think you can make a real case that his next fight's for the UFC championship. But I think with a 5th missed weight, even though this is his first time since moving up to bantamweight, you still got to kind of consider that a punishment. You kind of got to have to give him one more fight. And there are several fights out there for him. If Cody Garbrandt does indeed get Dominic Cruz later this year for the championship, of course, former champion TJ Dillashaw would be out there. Brian Caraway is out there as well, and I feel like those would be the 2 most likely options for John Lineker, with both guys being top rank and both guys currently coming off a win. An outside guy would be Rafael Asunciao. That would be an outside opponent to me. And I guess there could be a situation where Dominic Cruz gets hurt and maybe Lineker takes on Garbrandt. Again, a fight we were supposed to see back in February, which now, the fact that it didn't happen, it almost seems bigger than when it was supposed to happen back in February, with both guys being unranked in the top 15 of the bantamweight division. So, for Lineker, great victory. For Dodson, it wasn't so much that he was moving around. I think that hurt him a little bit because Lineker was really the one advancing, really the one throwing the output. But to me, the story was that output. The fact that Lineker threw, I mean, it wasn't quite 2-1, but pretty close. And I think that's that active nature of him hunting it and throwing that output, I think is maybe what swayed the judges. Because Dodson, while doing an excellent job of not getting hit, to me wasn't throwing enough back. He wasn't countering effectively enough off those misses by Lineker to get the victory, in my opinion. And that's maybe what swayed him with the judges. I'm just talking about the judges. Obviously, in my mind, I had Dodson winning the fight. I thought he did enough. But I think just if I'm trying to find a reason why the judges went the other way, that's the case you got to make. And for Dodson, again, you put up a valiant effort. It was an amazing fight. He's going to be back, but that would be the only little nitpick thing I would have to say. And obviously, again, the old Dana White adage, never leave in the hands of the judges too. But just in terms of nitpicking, that's the only thing I could say, is maybe just a tad more output could have turned the tide in his favor. Before I get to UFC 204 this weekend, I want to let fans know that I did an interview earlier in the week with Bellator kickboxing star Raymond Daniels, and you'll see the link pop up right here below you to check that out. And also, I'll play it again later, or pop up the link later. And it was also earlier in the show when I started, if you noticed it there as well. Timing-wise, it didn't work out to put it with the show this week, but I was able to know about it in advance as much as I could to at least let everyone here listening to the show this week that I did interview kickboxing star Raymond Daniels. And once again, a great interview by Raymond, a really cool guy to talk to him about a lot of cool things within Bellator world of kickboxing, even little MMA, as he's trained with guys like Rory McDonald and George St. Pierre and TJ Dillashaw. So definitely an awesome dude to talk to, and if you want to check it out again, the link just popped up right there. So besides UFC 204, if you didn't know, World Series of Fighting will be holding an event this Friday on NBC Sports. Will be in Kansas City, Missouri. Will feature 2 title fights, as David Branch will take on Viggy Magalhaes for his light heavyweight championship. As you remember, he's also the World Series of Fighting middleweight champion. In the main event, Justin Gaethje will defend his lightweight championship and try to keep his record perfect with no losses, as he's taking Ozzy Dulagov. Also, Jason High will take on João Ceferino, and Luis Firmino will take on Brian Foster. And I think this will be shown on the main card too, possibly. but also John Howard will take on Abu Akbar Nurmagomedov. And also former UFC heavyweight Sean Jordan will take on Ashley Gooch, if I said that correctly. So this should be a pretty interesting fight. Also another former UFC fighter, and I believe Bellator fighter as well, Bruno Santos will take on Clint Williams. So pretty stacked card, actually, for World Series of Fighting 33. Again, this Friday, October 7th on NBC Sports. David Branch versus Magalesh, I'm interested in. Both are pretty high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. Obviously, Magalesh has won, I believe, some Abu Dhabi tournaments and world championships. And, of course, David Branch, I believe, is a Gracie black belt. So that should be a very interesting tactical matchup. And, obviously, I believe this is Branch's first light heavyweight title defense. So I believe he already has a successful middleweight defense. So again, doing something I think people forget. They all talk about Conor McGregor, but David Branch, for what it's worth, is doing it in a relatively big and major organization, and no one seems to care. Probably because it's World Series of Fighting. I think if it was Bellator, he'd have a lot more notoriety. But I'm actually interested. Vinny Magalesh is a pretty dangerous fighter when it comes to jiu-jitsu-wise. But I'm actually intrigued by this card. A lot of good cards on there, and obviously Justin Gaethje is one of my favorite fighters in mixed martial arts to watch. Look out, Ozzy. No one's been able to so far stop this dude. Even though he hasn't even fought and competed against Ozzy yet, Justin Gaethje wants to be on World Series of Fighting New Year's card, which they have already booked to be in New York now that mixed martial arts is legal in the state once again. So we'll see. I mean, anything can happen. I wouldn't. Ozzy Dubagov is not a. I don't think he's no slouch. He's someone Justin Gaethje should beat, but worry about this fight first, and then we'll get on to trying to fight in December there for you, Justin. So hopefully that doesn't cause any sort of lapse in fighting ability, overlooking Ozzy for Justin Gaethje. UFC 204 this week on pay-per-view, Manchester, England. Of course, the main event being for the UFC Middleweight Championship, as Michael Bisping will take on Dan Henderson once again. First fight of the evening will be in the featherweight division, as normally bantamweight fighter Russell Doane is stepping up on short notice to take on Mirsad Bektic. The Bosnian native is undefeated in his career, 10 wins, no losses, as he's taking on the Hawaiian Russell Doane once again, taking on this fight on short notice. Of those 10 victories for the Bosnian, 5 have come by way of knockout. And so far in his UFC tenure, has accomplished a record of 3-0, being the likes of Chaz Skelly and Lucas Martins in his last fight, that being a knockout just 30 seconds into the second round. So he has been awfully impressive. He has also fought in top prospect-level organizations such as RFA, Titan, and Victory Fighting Championships, again, being successful in all of them. Looking at Russell Doane, he definitely had a disappointing loss in his last outing. I believe that was back at UFC Fight Night, I believe there in Las Vegas as part of the big International Fight Week. And he wants to get right back in there, obviously try to erase that loss that he had back to Pedro Munoz. That was officially on the Dos Anjos Eddie Alvarez Fight Pass card. He got submitted in the first round fight where he had good position, but got caught in the guillotine choke, and obviously he's kind of been on tough times lately, losing his last 3 outings. But the tough guys, Pedro Munoz, former RFA champion, he's a tough dude. Gerard Sanders, definitely a tough dude, and obviously early Alcantara has been ranked in the top 15 as well, and that he was, and he had just, and really the 3 losses come off of beating Marcus Brimage, which was a pretty good win for him. So this is kind of a crossroads fight here for Russell Doane. Obviously taking the fight on short notice might help him get another one even if he loses, but he's taking on a much bigger guy. And I think for Doane, I think you got to go in there and just kind of not throw caution to the wind, but I think you got to try to do something different. I think you got to throw him at crazy angles. I think you maybe got to attack off your back. I think maybe got to use a little more output because obviously you're going to be a little bit of a smaller guy there against Bektic, and you kind of have an advantage, the fact he hasn't had a lot of time to prepare for you. So if you can kind of do things awkward, maybe you change up even things that you normally do, mix up your combinations well, try to do a lot of movement, you should be the fresher guy, and really just try to confuse Betic because he's not prepared. He wasn't preparing for you at all. And I think if you can come things at different angles than his original opponent, that can maybe throw him off, and you may be able to sneak in a finish there. Next fight of the evening, heavyweight division, Stefan Struve against Daniel Olmachuk. I don't know. This is either going to be really exciting or really boring. Olmachuk hasn't really been that exciting of a guy, the fighter coming out of Poland. Stefan Struve has kind of had mixed results since coming back to the UFC after his heart condition and everything got cleared. So far, since returning to the UFC back in December of 2014, has gone 2-2. He beat Big Nog, what ended up being Big Nog's last fight, and he knocked out Bigfoot Silva, which everybody's been doing lately, back in his home country of the Netherlands, netting him a performance of the night bonus. So I'm not sure which Stefan Struve will show up. Is it the one that really couldn't do much and didn't show a sense of urgency against Jared Rosal, or is it going to be the one that just kind of blitzed Big Nog and obviously did enough and blitzed Bigfoot Silva to get a knockout? Which Stefan Struve are we going to see? Olmachuk is an okay striker. He's a solid grappler. I would think he would try to push the pace and have Struve carry his weight, being a little shorter, a little stockier guy in the clinch, and not allow the reach of Struve to help him out. And I think for Olmachuk, who did have a little bit of problems in his last fight, that was against, the name is blanking on me here, but it was a Rush fighter. Alexei Olenek. Alexei Olenek, a longtime veteran of the sport, did get out-grappled a little bit, in my opinion. So Stefan Struve, who is a pretty good submission guy in his own right, I would say even if you get taken down, I would say the advantage is yours. I don't think Olenek is that great of a grappler, so possibly an advantage there for Struve. So I think Olenek has a lot of work out for him. However, I think if he can keep it dirty, keep it in the clinch, not allow the reach of Struve to be as big a factor, I think he can win. But I think if Struve keeps this at range or gets the fight to the ground, whether he's on the top or the bottom, I think he can put Olenek away. Next fight of the evening will be in the light heavyweight division as Ovince St. Preux takes on Jimmy Manuwa. These two guys are very similar. They're only 2-inch different in height, only a 1-inch different in reach, and both hit extremely hard, and both have a lot of nastiness in them, and really just overall go for the finish when they have that chance. And that's what I believe what's going to happen. Somebody's going to get knocked out crazy in this fight. However, Ovince has taken on overall better competition as of late, and Ovince has come out on top a few times against some of that competition. He's beaten guys like Patrick Cummins, he's beaten Shogun Rua, he's beaten Ryan Jimmo, he's beaten Nikita Krylov, he's beaten Jean Vellante. Sure, he had the loss to John Jones, and sure, he had the loss to Glover Teixeira, but those were competitive bouts, especially considering the John Jones one. He took on like a week notice and went 5 rounds with John Jones. And also, he does have a win over Rafael Cavalcante, a.k.a. Feijão. So this is a guy who's beaten some tough guys, whereas you look at Manuwa, he's beaten kind of the lower echelon of this division, but anytime he's been matched up with a truly elite fighter, he has been finished. His biggest win probably coming over Ryan Jimmo, but the 2 times he's taking on guys towards the top, Alexander Gustafsson and Anthony Johnson, got knocked out by both gentlemen in the second round. And then in between those 2 losses had a really bad performance, albeit a win over Jan Blachowicz back in April of last year. So he has not fought in over a year since getting knocked out by Anthony Johnson. I wonder if that layoff will affect him against Ovince, who's been pretty active the last couple of years and obviously has already fought twice this year. So I'm not really sure. I don't know what Jimmy Manuwa's done in this past year to kind of retool himself, but I'd give a slight edge to Ovince St. Peru in this fight. However, Manuwa fighting in his home country of England could end up being the determining factor he needs to finally beat somebody in the top 10 of this division. Co-main event of the evening in the middleweight division, Vitor Belfort against Gegard Mousasi. Mousasi's coming off a win over Thiago Santos back at UFC 200. Vitor, of course, is coming off a loss to Jacare Souza back at UFC 198, and really, I think it was apparent to a lot of people, despite having a win over Dan Henderson, knocking out Dan Henderson once again in the first round back in November of last year, that Souza fight, I think, really showed that the ground skills and the work to be on the ground are just not there for Vitor Belfort. And Gegard Mousasi, a guy who, is a pretty awesome stand-up fighter, does have some knockouts, does actually have a lot of submission victories to his credit, and I believe he actually has more wins by submission than he does by knockout. And Mousasi, being a great strategist, I think has to know that's the area to attack Vitor. Actually, he has 20 knockout victories, 12 submissions. I thought it was, but still, that's still 32 finishes out of 39 victories, so that's still pretty good. He definitely, obviously, has submission ability. That's what I'm trying to get at here, and I think Vitor, at this stage of his career, he just doesn't have that. I don't know if it's a willingness to go to the ground or he just doesn't want to work there. He just wants to try for knockouts, but he's not the same guy that he once was. And I think that's very apparent. And I think Mousasi, this is a step for him towards the middleweight championship. And if he can beat a guy like Vitor Belfort, even at this stage of his career, I think that means something. Possibly puts him one away for the title shot. He probably factors in to face one of the losers of these big two non-title fights that are coming up in the middleweight division, with Jacare taking on Luke Rockhold once again coming up in November. And, of course, in November as well, Yoel Romero's taking on Chris Weidman. Gotta believe one of the winners of those two fights will take on the winner of Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping. And Mousasi will most likely take on the loser of one of those two fights, and, of course, could take on the loser of this title fight, being Dan Henderson against Michael Bisping. So it should be interesting, but I think unless Vitor catches Mousasi in the first 2 minutes, I think this fight is all Gegard, and it'll be, I think you could make a case his best victory of his career, and that should propel him to possibly one fight away from a title shot, or at the, at the very least, maybe even a title shot. I don't know. If he ends up having a very impressive victory over Vitor Belfort, who knows? That could possibly leapfrog him over Jacare or Weidman, Romero, or Rockhold. Not likely, but it's possible. And also injuries play a factor too, so if he can come out this thing relatively unscathed, who knows what exactly might happen, but most likely one fight away. And for Vitor, I hope, win or lose, this is your last fight. You had a great career. You're going to be in the UFC Hall of Fame. You're a former champion. You've beaten some of the best in the world in this sport. And if you go out quickly, I hope you don't, but if you do, I think you got to look at yourself and realize that this is time, and you're just not able to compete the way you want to, and I think the way fans want you to, and I hope, win or lose, that we see Vitor go out with some of his body still intact and some of his brains still intact. So I'm hoping for a good fight. It should be exciting, but I think unless Vitor catches him in that first 2 minutes, I would side with the one of the Dreamcatcher. Main event of the evening, Michael Bisping against Dan Henderson. Whether you think he deserves it or not, this is what we got here at UFC 204, and what appears to be Dan Henderson's last fight, win or lose, taking on Michael Bisping, the man he so famously knocked out at UFC 100 all those years ago. And Michael Bisping finally capturing the championship, something he has been working towards since coming into the UFC about a decade ago. Finally captured it by knocking out Luke Rockhold on short notice in the main event of UFC 199. And really since losing to Luke Rockhold back in November of 2014. He has put together 4 straight victories, beating the likes of CB Dalloway, Talis Leites, Anderson Silva, and then, of course, Luke Rockhold capturing the middleweight championship. And again, like I said about injuries, no one thought Michael Bisping was probably going to fight for the title after his win over Anderson Silva. An injury happens to Chris Weidman. It doesn't appear that Jacare was ready to go after fighting just about a month before at UFC 198. It looked like he had some injury problems. So in stepped Michael Bisping, and he not only gets revenge on Luke Rockhold for his loss back in November of 2014, he also captures the middleweight championship. And now he gets a chance at revenge again, this time in his home country, England, where, again, he has never lost fighting in his home country of England, taking on Dan Henderson, who probably gave him his worst loss of his career. I think that's a pretty safe assessment. I think for Dan Henderson, besides landing that H-bomb, I don't think he's got a whole lot left. Obviously, if you look in that Lombard fight, he got caught several times. Lombard wasn't able to put him away. Dan Henderson was able to keep coming and eventually get the knockout. However, Bisping isn't Hector Lombard. He's going to be a little taller. He's a little longer. Just bigger overall. Maybe not as muscular, but definitely a guy that's a little bigger frame. And a guy that is in incredible shape. A guy that I think really wants to win this fight. And I'm not saying that Dan Henderson doesn't want to win, but the fact that he's never lost in his home country, he wants this rematch, he wants to defend the title. I think there's a little bit of pressure on Bisping, and there's really none on Dan Henderson because, as I stated, I'm pretty sure win or lose, this is going to be his last fight. So for him, he was campaigning for the shot. He wasn't really sure if he was going to get it. Maybe he shouldn't have got it, but the UFC doing a favor to a legend, a guy that will be in the UFC Hall of Fame, and if he wins, obviously you can make a case he's the most decorated mixed martial arts fighter of all time, capturing a UFC tournament title. He was also a U.S. Olympian wrestler. He won 2 Pride championships and a Pride Grand Prix. And he also won a Strikeforce championship as well. So if he can capture the UFC championship, it's pretty much just icing on a cake on what is already a pretty historic career, arguably the greatest one of all time. So it doesn't really matter what happens to Dan Henderson. His legacy is intact. If Michael Bisping loses again to Dan Henderson, that affects his legacy. I'm not sure if that's something that Bisping worries about, but this is a pretty big fight for him. But, saying but a lot, sorry. I just think that Michael Bisping is just super motivated for this fight. I think Dan Henderson, at this stage in his career, is going to have a hard time keeping up with the pace of Michael Bisping. I think he learned the strategy that went wrong for him in the first fight, circling towards the power hand of Dan Henderson. Obviously was a mistake. He's probably not going to do that this time. And I think he learned a lot rematching Luke Rockhold. He was doing the things technically he did wrong in the first matchup, and that led to a first-round knockout. Now, I don't know if we'll get a first-round knockout against Dan Henderson, but I feel that Bisping will be able to go in there, kind of pepper with shots, possibly catch Dan Henderson with something in the second or third, and get a finish. Really short of an H-bomb landing again, I think Michael Bisping should take this one. With that said, though, let's get to my official picks here for UFC 204 Manchester, England, this Saturday on pay-per-view. Starting first in the featherweight division, Mirsad Bektic against Russell Doan. Going to go with Bektic in this matchup. I think Doan, on short notice, can cause some problems for Bektic, but I think Bektic is a guy that is on the up and up here in the featherweight division. I think he's a bigger guy, and I think he'll be able to outmuscle Doan and get a victory in this one. Stefan Struve against Daniel Olmec. Got to go Stefan Struve. I think he has more weapons to win the fight and more weapons to finish this fight, and I think gained some confidence back after knocking out Bigfoot Silva and winning in his home country. I think that's going to be a little bit of a boost, and I'm going to give him my pick here for UFC 204. Ovince St. Preux against Jimmy Manuwa. Manuwa is fighting in his home country, however. I think he's faltered against some of the better guys in this division. Ovince has beaten some really good guys in this division, and I think despite losing to John Jones, I think learned a lot, and I think gained some confidence knowing that he went toe-to-toe with the guy, the caliber with John Jones on short notice and didn't get finished. And I think I think, landed a couple nice shots on John, too, in the process. So I'm going to go with Ovince St. Preux to take this matchup. Vitor Belfort against Gegard Mousasi. As fans of this show know, if you've been listening for years, I've always been a fan of Vitor Belfort. However, I think it's time for him to hang him up, win or lose here at UFC 204. And I think outside of a quick blitz early in this first round, I got to go with the Dreamcatcher. I think his grappling ability, he'll take it to the ground and expose Vitor that way, where he has been his last several fights. So I'm going to go with Gegard Mousasi to win this one. Main event of the evening, Dan Henderson against Michael Bisping for the UFC Middleweight Championship of the World. Short of an H-bomb, I think this is Bisping's time to not only get revenge, solidify his legacy, but also defend the UFC middleweight title successfully and once again stay undefeated in his home country of England. I just think that he has a little more left in the tank at this stage in his career, so I'm going to go with Michael Bisping to stay the champion of the world. Also, real quickly, some notable fights here on the undercard. Mike Perry will try to make it 2 in a row in the UFC as he's taking on Danny Roberts. Also, Albert Tumanov will take on Leon Edwards. That should be a pretty good fight there. Davey Grant against Damon Stasic. And Rob Font against Ian Entwistle. And then the highlight fight there on the FS1 prelims will be Brad Pickett against Uri Alcantara. So, looking forward to those fights there. Also, Leandro Santos against Adrian Martins on the Fight Pass, I think also should be a pretty interesting scrap. Both guys trying to get into the top 15 of the weight division. As you saw pop up once, twice, and now 3 times, if you haven't checked it already or you're intrigued, I had an interview with kickboxer Raymond Daniels earlier in the week, talking about his win there at Bellator Kickboxing 3, and obviously he already has his next fight booked for Bellator Kickboxing 4 in December in Italy. So click on the link there if you want to check out what Raymond had to say about his last fight and, of course, his upcoming effort there in December. Also, like to thank the supporters of Beyond the Cage, the MMAcommunity.com, Flying Brian J, Legends of the Cage, of course, MMAFightClub.net, brand new website. Check that out. Beyond the Cage is on there, of course, a lot of trending news stories and whatnot. And you can also join the conversation on their Facebook page, facebook.com/MMAFightClub. Also like to thank the artist Gorilla the Bear, of course. He did that Winter Soldier drawing there in the background. If you're looking for your own custom either comic book or MMA-related art piece, he can do original art pieces for it. Contact him on Twitter at Gorilla the Bear and Instagram also at Gorilla the Bear, and hit him up. He is more than willing to draw a piece for you there for a price. Again, he doesn't do it for free, but as you can see, it's quality work. Also like to thank MMAinsider.net, MMAforlife.ca. Of course, good friend AJ Hiller and supporter of the show running MMASignaturesUSA.com. He just told me he got some new signatures in of Stephen Thompson as well as women's bantamweight champion Amanda Nunes and Cody Garbrandt as well. So if you're looking for signatures from Nunes, Garbrandt, or Stephen Thompson, check out MMASignaturesUSA.com for the new listing. And also, he puts some stuff on eBay too. If for some reason you don't see it on his website, he puts a lot of stuff on his eBay page, AM Hiller on eBay, and sometimes he'll post some stuff on the cheap, get you a good deal. But it's all certified, again, through MMASignaturesUSA.com. I'm Jim Graham. I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. And, of course, you can like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Thank you again for listening to the show. I appreciate it each and every week. And I'm looking forward to a good weekend of fights here for the UFC and also World Series of Fighting. So until next week, thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.